Hello, I'm Toby Walsh. I'm a professor of artificial intelligence here at UNSW, and unfortunately, I'm a bit tied up this afternoon, so I've recorded this video because I'm very interested in this new project, and I'd love to get some feedback on this. So let me start by sharing my slides. Here we go. So I want to talk about whether we can use AI to do rip spotting. So here's the big picture dream. This was the idea that caught our attention, was that spotting rips is something that we learn as humans, and therefore it seems that we could, especially using the current state of computer vision systems, try and get a computer to do the same thing, and that would be a very useful outcome, as I'll explain shortly. And so what we'd love to do is to take some imagery like this and be able to spot if and where exactly on that imagery were the rips. Just to begin by saying who we are. As I said, I'm Professor of Artificial Intelligence here at UNSW in the School of Computer Science. I'm a laureate fellow, and I've spent actually all of my life working in AI. But some colleagues also in the School of Computer Science are interested in this project. We've got Yang Song, who's a future fellow who brings in the real expertise in computer vision and deep learning, and another colleague, Wafa, who's also got some background in machine learning, human-computer interaction, and other aspects that might be important, relevant to this project. So what might you use RipSpotter for? And I've been thinking about this, and my ideas here at least have evolved somewhat from the beginning, which is that ultimately, we would love to build an app that would be on your smartphone that could do this, and you could just give to the public. And there are, of course, so many unpatrolled beaches around Australia's extensive coastline that could potentially be a great safety device. But with that, of course, comes significant challenges, risks to be able to do that in a way that can be done responsibly. And so I think that's very much the long-term dream. And I've been thinking about what will be much shorter term, but nevertheless useful outcomes that you could get for something from this. And I suspect the answer there might be building a tool that could actually allow us to predict into the future, to forecast into the future where rips could be. And that could be used by, for example, local councils that were wanting to decide where and how many resources to be putting out in the field on some particular day next week for patrolling beaches, where the risks will be, where the rips are going to be. And will be used for such sorts of decisions. So I see the problem breaking down in two parts. First of all, being able to build that tool that we just saw to be able to predict rips, and then using that tool then in a further machine learning system to be able to then predict into the future rips. So to do the second, you need lots of data. You need to know where rips were on lots of historical points at the time, and that you'll get that by building this tool, this first computer vision tool, and then you would build a second machine learning tool that would be doing the prediction into the future. So breaking it down into manageable chunks, you might set a year one goal is to build the computer vision system that could do this rip spotting, that could annotate video or still imagery with where it identifies rips might be. The thing here that we would then be able to collect data sets that would be too large for human eyes or human boredom to be able to look at, that will be useful then for the second task of predicting into the future, days or even weeks ahead, where rips might be turning up. And of course, there might be interesting spin-off side effects that you might get from such a tool. We might be able to, for example, identify new types of rips. That's only, computer vision systems have done that in other areas of science. I mean, so a wonderful, perhaps the best example is astronomy, where we've thrown machine learning algorithms, data clustering algorithms at astronomical catalogs, catalogs of stars. And they've identified a new type of brown dwarf that astronomers hadn't thought of, and then theorists actually came up with some interesting ideas how that fitted into the evolution of stars. So equally, by being able to identify rips at scale, and then using data mining tools, we may be able to identify, well, actually, there's another type of rip to think about that maybe rip scientists haven't yet thought about. So that's the first goal, which is to be able to take some imagery and identify if there are rips and where those rips might be in that imagery. And then the second goal, something that we could try perhaps in the second year, is to take data sets that include rips that have been identified. So there's a beach with rips, and the rip identification may go beyond just binary 0, 1, there's a rip there, there isn't a rip there, but we may be looking at identifying the strength of the rip, and the size and scale of the rip. Using that data, and also other data that's obviously clearly going to be very important to this problem, such as, well, particular, of course, the particular beach you're on, the type of rips is going to depend very much so on the type and shape of beach that you're on. But also other things such as the tide forecast, the weather forecast, wave forecast, the wind forecast, things like this that are going to feed into being able to predict several days out whether the extent and number of rips you might be predicting on a particular beach. Then in the third year, having built these prototypes, you would look to be deploying them in the wild on physical real beaches, and be looking at running some sort of experiment to evaluate the quality of the predictions that are being made. And as I said, ultimately, I think my long-term ambition would be, and this is a very long-term ambition, would be able to build a smartphone app that you could literally give to members of the public, so that they could turn up at an unpatrolled beach and use it with confidence. A little bit about the scientific challenge of first of all, being able to identify rips on a beach. There are a number of questions that, a number of dimensions of the problem that we'll have to think about in terms of trying to break the problem down into something manageable. Will we be able to do it from still imagery, or, as I suspect more likely, will it be better being run off video? I mean, of course, we get the motion that you get from video is going to be useful to identify flows in the water. Another question is what sort of imagery will we need? Can we do it with black and white imagery, or can we do it, or would it be better with RGB imagery that gives us color and contrast better? And we might even consider infrared and move beyond the visual spectrum. Another really important characteristic of the imagery, whether it be video or still, is the aspect that we're taking the image from. Clearly, aerial imagery is perhaps going to be, I suspect, the most easy to do, but equally, it's perhaps not so realistic to assume that we're going to have lots of aerial imagery. I mean, it is possible we could put drones up, or the users of such systems would be willing to put drones up to do this, but equally, I think it would be more realistic to be thinking about, for example, fixed cameras on headlands. That's certainly very plausible, and there are already lots of imagery like that available that we could tap into. But we wouldn't perhaps necessarily stop just at looking at headland imagery. That might be where we began, because it might be a very easy starting point. Apologies, the refuse truck has just moved in. Whether we could take imagery that looks down along the beach, taken from a not particularly high level, maybe from the tower that the coast, the lifeguards are sitting in, but something that's pretty low level. But then, of course, what might be ultimately the greatest challenge, which is that could we do it head on at no great height, maybe at best from the sand dune as you approach the beach. Those are going to be somewhat different problems, and we're probably going to end up training completely different machine learning, computer vision systems for those different images, and treat them somewhat as separate problems. Of course, the features that we work out is useful for one will turn out no doubt to be useful for the other, but you might end up with quite different algorithms for the different settings. And as I said earlier on, it's also the type of beach. A very long beach where rips may be moving around, breaking out at different points, may be very different to a small narrow beach between headlands where the rips are very consistent in where they turn up. So we certainly may have different imagery for those different sites of beach. And then, of course, there's the type of rip itself. There are, not all rips are the same, and we might save off looking for flash rips as a stretch goal, and look at more stable rips to begin with as means of making the problem, at least to begin with, more manageable. Even when we're doing just identifying rips in imagery, we might find it useful, it might be necessary to use data that goes beyond the image data itself. The tide state, of course, is going to be very critical. The location, of course, is going to be very critical. It gives us a prior on where to expect the rips. The wind direction, the wave height, those are all going to be data that, if we have it, may usefully feed in to help us make the identification of rips an easier task. And clearly all that data is going to be definitely very useful when we come to the second task of predicting rips into the future. So here's an idea of how that may then be expanded out into a set of work packages. Data, of course, is incredibly important, driving a lot of machine learning today. So the first work package would be all about collecting and labeling that data. And now labeling the data is going to be a significant challenge. We need experts who know, who can identify rips themselves. So that's a significant bottleneck. And certainly one of our scientific ideas is to use techniques that require less amounts of labeled data. And certainly that's an interesting, exciting area of machine learning today. Semi-supervised learning, where it's not supervised in the sense of all the data's been labeled, but we're using data sets where only a small amount of the data is being labeled, and we're using machine learning actually to cluster the data and identify labels itself. In terms of where the imagery will come from, there is already quite a lot of existing data sources to be had, but we certainly will have to go out and source suitable data streams that we can actually run and train the algorithms on. And the second work package would be writing a computer vision system that could identify rips in imagery. There will, as usual, be a process of experiment and iterate to see if we get decent performance. There has been a small amount of work in the literature that suggests that we're going to have success at doing this, and then we might end up with a Turing-like test in the sense of, can we label imagery more accurately than humans can do it? And we will expect to be doing it quicker, faster cheaper than humans can do it. And the question though remains, can we do it more accurately, or as accurately as humans can do it? Then there will be a third work package where we look not at the problem of identifying RIPS in imagery, but in terms of predicting RIPS into the future, days, weeks ahead on a particular beach. And then we'll be certainly needing, if we haven't already done, sourcing data sets that bring in things like tide, weather, wind state, wind direction, wave state, these sorts of things. And then build a second machine learning algorithm that taking data about RIP counts, RIPS on beaches, and all this other data about the weather, and tide, and so on, and then starts to try and make predictions as to the RIPS that are going to be on a particular beach at a particular time on some day in the future. And then finally, of course, we'll have to evaluate how well we've succeeded at that task. Just a couple of words about some of the scientific machine learning challenges here. As I said, there has been some work. We've already seen in the literature a small number of studies, somewhat limited, but nevertheless, they give us confidence that we should be able to succeed at this task. We will be looking to use some deep learning based methods. That's certainly going to, the indications are that should be successful. As I said, we will probably be looking not to fully supervised learning where everything has to be labeled with the exact, with the RIPS in place, but somewhat semi-supervised learning so that we don't actually have to have too much labeled data, which is going to be a bottleneck for this task. We're thinking about preparing an ARC linkage proposal for this. This seems to be a suitable mechanism to get some funding to help us do this. There are projects which will do research. There is certainly research required here that allow us to collaborate with outside bodies like Surf Life Saving, like the councils that are responsible for various beaches. It clearly fits the category of applying advanced knowledge, acquiring new knowledge, and there's clearly commercial and other benefits to being able to build such a system that predict RIPS into the future. In terms of applying advanced knowledge, we'll be applying advanced computer vision systems to RIP spotting and prediction. It certainly it will acquire some new knowledge. We don't know if we can do this accurately enough to be useful, certainly in terms of most definitely certainly in terms of prediction into the future. In terms of the commercial and other benefits, I believe there could be significant benefits in terms of RIP science, in terms of identifying RIPS, and ultimately in terms of that long-term dream of building an app eventually that you give to the public. But even the intermediate goals that I've sketched would be of significant value, I would hope, to people patrolling beaches in terms of where they devote their limited resources in planning and so on. Such a linkage would bring together researchers like myself at the School of Computer Science. We'll obviously need some domain expertise that come from people in the biological sciences, people with much greater knowledge about RIPS, and of course the outside bodies like Surf Life Saving, possibly the councils who would be providing both possible funding, but also perhaps imagery and other background expertise. Linkage projects are supposed to run between 2 and 5 years, although they all seem to be exactly 3 years. It's hard to find one that isn't 3 years, so I suspect we'll write a 3-year grant. You typically ask between 50 and 300K. If we could get 100K, I think that would, a year, that would be great. We'd be able to apply a postdoc. If we got less than that, we'd have to think less ambition, a PhD student, 40 or 50K. There's an expectation there's a 25% contribution from the partner organization. That is not necessary. It can be waived for charities and non-profits. The only caveat there, though, is if they have contributed in the past to other linkages, then the expectation is, well, they're willing to contribute. In the past, they should have skin in the game here. Then it's much more likely to be successful if we get them to provide skin into the game. And as I said, it'd be great to hear your ideas, feedback, questions. I'm happy to have a conversation, a Zoom meeting or a telephone call, or even face-to-face. The one reason that I may not be able to join you this afternoon is that I'm actually having my second COVID jab, so I feeling good to get back and meeting people again. So thanks for your attention, and I look forward to your ideas and feedback.